Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Amelia, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Would you mind introducing yourself to everyone out there listening?
For sure. And thanks for having me on. So, my name is Amelia Cotter. I am an author, researcher, and storyteller. I'm originally from Maryland, but I've been in Chicago for about 16 years. And I primarily research folklore and people's personal paranormal experiences throughout the Midwest as well as on the East Coast.
What sparked up your interest in the paranormal experiences of others?
I guess I've always been interested in ghost stories since I was a kid. So I was at the library looking in the occult section when I was very young, even before I could read. My family was always very like adjacent to the topic. So family gatherings and dinners, somebody would always tell some kind of ghost story or have cool, interesting, spooky tale to tell. And so I was always fascinated by that. It helped me connect to family and my home state of Maryland and my hometowns and all these things. And then as I've gotten into writing and being more into this professionally, we've gone through many waves, like with paranormal trends, popular trends of like ghost hunting and paranormal investigation and being part of a group and doing things this and that kind of way. And I've never really felt like I fit in with that type of like as a ghost hunter. So I'm really excited about haunted places, but I don't really care if ghosts exist or not. Things like, you know what I mean? So I'm like, I'm more interested in like people's emotional, I'm not interested in like the scientific side of things. I'm more interested in people's emotional relationship with spirits and hauntings and how they come to just sort of how we relate to them culturally. Our fascination with them fascinates me.
I think it's with all of our culture, there's a fascination in the paranormal. But surprisingly, any person that you ask whether they're a believer or not, they'll always go, I don't believe in the paranormal, but there is this one time. And then there's this, everyone has this one story where they can't explain everything. They can't put it to a scientific thing, but it makes them have that little bit of belief of like, there might be something.
Right. I find that most people, even if people staunchly believe like, oh, I hate that stuff is ridiculous. That's stupid. People will stomp all over like my, you know, 15 years of hard work as a writer and researcher just by totally dismissing the topic. And instead of taking it personally, I think to myself, like they have a story that they are not ready to tell. um, but you're right, like pretty much everybody, people might not be super like gung ho about talking about ghosts, but they're like, yeah, but this one time, or they might take me to the side, or they might email me later, or if I'm at a party and somebody has a drink or two, they might be like, there was this thing that happened to me that I can never explain. So I think there's like a hesitancy sometimes to label it, which I think is okay. Um, but it is interesting. Most people will open up that they've had either an unexplainable experience or that they are interested in the unexplained. So even now, there's a lot of sort of cultural interest moving towards like a fascination with true crime and other topics that aren't necessarily related to paranormal, spiritual, new agey, esoteric, whatever, but things that still like attract people, these sorts of these dark matter subjects and things that people are willing to explore now that they're a little bit more in, ingrained in pop culture and social media.
How difficult was it for you to find someone with a paranormal experience? It's not very, at least a lot of people aren't very open about talking about some of those things. Like it's cool, like if it's like late at night and you're watching X Files, you could just toss out like, "Hey, there was this." But if you're actually trying to get something to write a book or to be able to actually research into something, a lot of people are not open to sharing their story, at least that publicly.
For sure. So it's gotten a lot easier over the years now that I am somebody who puts myself out there as being interested in ghost stories and collector of ghost stories. It's much easier to collect them. The problem I have now is that people think that their stories aren't scary enough. People are like, well, I had this experience, but really all it was like I heard a voice or I heard some footsteps, or I'm not sure if it was paranormal, but this happened. And I think it's not spooky enough to be published or to be shared or to warrant talking about. When I got started, Basically, my book, Maryland Ghosts, Paranormal Encounters in the Free State, was a collection of family stories and friends, people I grew up with in Bel Air, Maryland, that had all these great tales from all of our weird nighttime adventures together. And then I was able to get in contact with different paranormal investigation groups, ghost hunter types, and historians, people who worked at haunted places that were willing to tell their tales.
Can you tell me one of your most memorable personal experiences that you had, whether it was information from a family member or just one thing that really sticks out in your mind that you carry with you to this day?
Sure. So, gosh, I have so many.
I'm kind of jealous that you have so many. I maybe have one. I'll put one up on the board.
I know. I think that I have been reluctant over the years to admit that I am more like sensitive than, or I'm probably more sensitive to the stuff than I think I am. People always ask about that. Do you think that you have psychic abilities and all this stuff? And I'm like, hell no. But then I have this and this and this and this story and this story. And so I've been really lucky, and probably I have some underdeveloped, I don't know, capabilities. That I'll continue to explore in the second half of my life. But I my most cherished story happened when I was young, when I was a kid, that kind of got me really, really revved up about this stuff. Was that my dad worked at a restaurant called the Manor Tavern in Moncton, Maryland, which is still there. And there was an abandoned house next door to that was several hundred. So the whole property was several hundred years old. It was like the original Lord Baltimore, Charles Calvert's property, and the restaurant had been a stable in the mid 1700s, and then it had turned into different things before it became this restaurant. So there were a lot of old houses on the property, and some of them were occupied, some weren't. There was this house that was locally referred to as Walter's house, directly adjacent to the restaurant. So you could literally see the house from the patio. You could be like sipping your Manhattan on the patio of this fine dining restaurant and look into this creepy old house. It was kind of awesome, and everybody kind of embraced it. So I became fascinated with that house and the story of Walter, even though everybody just referred to the ghosts as Walter, all of the ghosts that were there or may have been there on the property. And so I was about 11, and my parents let me explore it and go inside of it. And I really became like charmed by this home and its history and just the idea of ghosts. Um, and anyway, I had really wanted to see the ghosts, and I was young and impressionable and open to the experience. And so one day, as I was leaving with a friend from school, that we went to go see the house together. This was like in a summer afternoon. My mom was driving us, and we pulled away from the house. And I had been saying to myself, like, man, I really I just want to see the ghost, right? I like manifested this. But as we were pulling away, I looked up into one of the attic windows, and there was a young man or a boy leaning out of the upper attic window on the left side, I think, with his hands on the windowsill, and he was watching us, but he had no face, so it was just a white space. It wasn't scary. It was just there was no face, but I could see his hair and his clothing, like the old fashioned like suspenders and like puffy sleeves gathered at the cuff. Um, and and his head turned and watched as we were driving away. And I gasped at the same time that my friend Graham gasped. So we both saw it. And I asked him, what did you see? And he described the exact same thing to me. My mom she was driving. So we were pulling away slowly. So we were like pulling out of the parking lot kind of. And she was like, oh my God, should I back up? And I remember in my like 11-year-old wisdom, I was like, don't back up, because if he's still there, I think I'm going to be afraid. But if he's gone, then I'm going to second guess what I saw. I just want this to be like burned in my memory. And I remember when I had looked up and saw this figure there, and he was completely white. I think I mentioned that, but like white, but like with texture. So you could see it was like different shades of white and beige for like the texture of his body and his clothing. I mean, he was totally solid. And uh, I got this like swirling feeling in my stomach, like that static electricity feeling that Other people have also described when they're having like paranormal experiences or seeing an apparition. And I also got this sort of internal message from him that he was surprised that, like, even though he had no face, there was no facial expression. I had this sense that he was surprised that we could see him. And so it was just awesome. Like it was, some people come to an interest in the paranormal because of something terrifying that happened to them when they were kids, or otherwise. And I totally understand and respect that. For me, it was very different. I was completely over the moon. I was honored. I was like, wow, this is the neatest thing on earth. And I've never seen I've seen some interesting stuff. I haven't seen like a full body apparition of a person again. Uh, but so it really is like, it's very special. It's like a very dear experience to me.
When did you start taking it like seriously when it came to just bringing equipment and actually getting involved into some of the research stuff? Like, is it before you reached out to the actual paranormal investigative teams?
Yeah, so like when I was exploring when I was a kid, I had a little ghost hunters kit. Like this was way before. This was in the 90s, so this was before ghost hunters and everything was like popular on TV and everything. We had sightings and unsolved mysteries. Um and like MTV, like Fear or whatever, I think was like the other one that was on. But I had my little goofy ghost hunting kit, and I wish that I still had like I wish I still had it. But when I moved to and then I would take a recorder with me because my friends and I, we got into a lot of fun and trouble when we were in school because we lived really close to like, I mean, I lived in Bel Air, Maryland, so we were close to everything. We were close to Baltimore, Gettysburg. We would go for these long drives. We weren't like crazy party people, but we would like go to cemeteries and go to abandoned houses and stay out late and drive 2 hours to Gettysburg and like sneak onto the battlefield and stuff like that. We went to like Penhurst Asylum before it was cool. So, but anyway, like I would take a recorder and stuff and just kind of like goof around with it and maybe listen to any recordings that I had. And I would keep them for myself, but I didn't really share them with anybody because there was nobody at the time that I had that was like interested in sharing that with me. But then when I moved to Chicago and I started writing and I wanted to write about uh, ghosts. I didn't know that I thought I just was going to write ghost stories like for kids. I didn't realize I was going to become involved in this whole world of like the paranormal. Um, but so I joined like the Chicago Ghost Hunters group, meetup group, and kind of got more into it then. And I own, I have a few little pieces of gadgety equipment and still have my trusty digital recorder that I use. So that's when I was more serious and organized about ghost hunting. But I also am a little rebellious about all because I've found over the years that people who are really organized and serious about paranormal investigations that have groups and everything, it can really take the fun and the adventure and the magic, like the personal experience and the personal connection that you're making with a space or with a spirit can really be that can suck the life right out of the room, literally, by having these like super organized paranormal investigations that are supposed to be sort of science driven, but like they're not really science driven. And they're more ego driven, etc. So I find it more fun to go on my own now. And I just like to use my five senses. And I still bring that recorder though, obviously to pick up voices if I can, but I try to keep it low tech.
You mentioned that you've had multiple kind of paranormal experiences. Did it get more frequent as you got older?
Yes, yes. So that's an interesting question because a lot of times I think the reason why I saw an apparition when I was 11 is because like kids are supposed to be there's like something about like the brain development of children that children who are susceptible to having these experiences tend to stop having them around like puberty and adolescence. And so oftentimes people will have had many experiences when they were kids and then they'll kind of stop as they get older. I think I've had the opposite experience because I just exposed myself so much by doing like more um by deliberately going into haunted places looking for ghosts and opening myself up to experiences and stuff like that. And as I've gotten even older, there's been like an arc of like, my experience, my personal journey in this, where I have become more open to the idea that maybe I'm a little more sensitive than I think I am. And so I tend to have more experiences now, I think, because whatever, I give off a certain kind of energy or something that brings them in. But I don't know what to do with it though yet. That's what I'm working on next.
It's
So
called being an empath, I think it is, when you're more in touch with like I've been called that before because I'm very kind of like emotional, not emotional, but like sensitive to certain things like that, like even frequencies and noises and like that.
empath is definitely for me, that's a term to be careful with. When it comes to it, a lot of people throw that term around like um very liberally in the sense that like I think, yeah, like you have to have empathy to be an empath, right? Like you can't like I would believe like you and I are probably empaths, but I've seen that word get tossed around like out of context where it's like it's not a catch-all term for people who are um susceptible to experiences, I guess. But that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Were you surprised to know how many haunted locations there were in Maryland? Because honestly, I didn't really think there was really any. And then when I saw your book, I was like, well, she's got a good list right here documented down.
Yeah, Maryland is a fantastically haunted state because we have revolutionary history, we have colonial history, we have pre-colonial history. Before white Europeans, we've got the Civil War history, we've got all of these military bases and major cities, related to. So we've got great UFO stories and really rich lore surrounding like creatures and stuff like that. And you wouldn't think of that. Like when I was growing up in Maryland, I think ghost stories helped me be excited about it because I was like a boring little suburban girl in a boring little town and very restless and very eager to know the world. And so getting interested in hauntings helped me connect to history. It helped me connect to Maryland in a way that made me feel excited about some of these places that seemed really mundane, all these cookie cutter suburbs and everything. Um, but yeah, you you wouldn't think at first glance, but there really is just a very rich history and experiences and just all things paranormal there.
Now, have you ever been in a violent interaction when it comes to one of these paranormal ones? Not like seeing like being hurt or anything, but feeling like you were threatened or danger a little bit. You know, you mentioned the window thing, but the way you described it made it sound a little bit more like there was a happiness factor to it, or like that you're able to see this. And anytime you see anything what people call like a paranormal encounter, they want to see like a poltergeist or someone get thrown across the room or something. I mean, it's not always like that. Sometimes it's just you hear something on like a frequency or a little walkie-talkie.
Right, you're absolutely right. Most of it is not violent, and most of it, even when someone interprets something, even if when people get EVPs that have like a loud or a spooky voice, it's not necessarily what the spirit might be trying to communicate. It's just kind of like the frequency that it's being delivered on. There's even some theories that I agree with about like scratching and stuff like that, where like if something is just trying to contact or communicate with you or touch you, it might accidentally hurt you. If you think about it, like if you and I died right now and we're like floating through the abyss, we
Knocking
don't
on wood
know
on
how
that
to
one.
we don't know how to be a ghost. We don't know what the rules are. We as living people don't know what the rules are. I assume that when you cross over to the other side, it's not like you get a manual on like how to haunt people. So I think that like when their attempts to communicate with us, we will easily sort of misinterpret in a lot of ways. There have been a couple times where I have been very uncomfortable. And like I enjoy being spooked, so I don't mind being spooked and like you know, being girly about it or whatever. But there have been a couple times where I was genuinely uncomfortable. And one of those was at the Patapsco Female Institute in Ellicott City, Maryland. So the Patapsco Female Institute is now, it's like a ruin, but they do like outdoor theater and other cool things there. But it has a history of having been a girls' school, and I think like maybe like a field hospital or something like that for guys returning from World War One or two. There weren't, and somebody should fact check that, but there weren't like recorded deaths there. There was like one recorded death there from the time that it was a hospital, and it was literally a hospital, so that's like really good news. Like when there's only one death and it wasn't like a violent or tragic death, and most people who were there at the school had a good time. So I didn't get the sense from the time that I was there, the caretakers of the property were very strange. Interviewing the caretakers and getting to know them, I remarked that the one guy never blinked, and I think that he was on something. And this was years ago, so years ago. It's not probably the same people at all. But there were some interesting things found on the property that looked like people had been engaging in like different rituals and stuff like that. And I don't think that like rituals bring negativity and evil and all that. I think that people just conjure stuff when they don't know what they're doing. Goofy goobers, right? That think that they're being cool and they're going to do some voodoo or something like that. They're not conjuring evil. They're just opening a door and like stuff is coming in and out because they don't know what they're doing. So I didn't sense that the property was haunted because of the history of it. I sensed that these folks had brought in some weird energy with them and were like encouraging it to manifest because they were really excited that the place was haunted and really excited that it was like a bad haunting. And so this was the one time, or one of the few times where I saw things that like people have described as like crawlers, like these like sort of black blobs, like sort of moving along walls and things like that, things that didn't seem to be the spirits of people, and also things that didn't seem to be like entities. They seemed more like manifestations of like negative energy or bad energy. So not even like living, not even like not living, but you know what I mean, not like organic. People will describe entities, demonic entities or something, is like things that have never lived or died as a human, but they are like their own interdimensional being or whatever. But this didn't feel like that. It felt like somebody's bad energy had like manifested itself into one of those giant like mucinex boogers, and it was like these black things moving on the wall, and I had bad feelings. I had bad, angry, sad feelings being there. It was one of the few times that I've like screamed like movie screamed, because there, just the tension of these like something that was blacker than the blackness, like coming out of the dark towards us, and it was wild. And I dreamt about that place afterwards, and uh, it was it was very interesting. This again was years ago. I think that there's new leadership and ownership, and there was a huge flood in Ellicott City that impacted a lot of the places that were there. But I'll never forget how freaked out I was, because I didn't feel like what was there were spirits. It was like something else.
Tackling the history side of it, did you just hear people's paranormal experiences or what they saw, then decide to research into it, and then discover that there was like an actual person that fit this person's description of a ghost that they saw, and then you're able to actually research and learn more about, oh, this person had died there at this day or whatever, and he was involved into this?
Sure, sure. So usually it goes that way. And it's not always like TV where the story kind of wraps up neatly with a bow. Like sometimes you can make a best guess about like, sometimes it's easy because a person is like, yes, I see, here's a portrait of so and so who owned this house. This is the apparition that I saw. That makes life easy. Other times you have a history that is much more entangled. So the Patapsco Female Institute is a good example of that, because it has like a long history that seems really interesting. It was an all-female school. Places like that are really good breeding grounds. Legends about, oh, the things that must have gone on there, when like literally it's like a woman's finishing school. Um, and then if it was used as some sort of like field hospital or like a convalescing sort of place for soldiers. And so, you know, again, very basic, like a place for people to come and heal. And but in our minds, in our modern minds, and even sometimes in the present day in history, people love rumors and stories and legends. And so these sort of legends about things grow out of that. Uh, and things and places can definitely be haunted when only mundane things go on there. A lot of people live in haunted houses where the ghost was just somebody who really loved their home and still watching over it. Most ghost stories are not like particularly like wild and crazy. So that's not out of the question, but it is definitely a matter of like, is, you know, who is haunting here and why? And do we need to know why? Because that sort of branches off into another area. Like, um, you know, in some cultures around the world, like it's really it's a welcome idea to have like a house ghost or a house spirit. And we, I think, used to kind of feel that way too as a society, like a haunted house was kind of a cool thing. Now, in the last 10 years, and we go through this like cyclically, 30 and 40 years ago, there was like satanic, that kind of stuff. And we're doing it again now. But just this idea that that ghosts are evil or they want to harm us and every these invisible forces that are coming to get us and we're not safe in our own homes, which translates to stuff that's going on, right, like politically in the world. And most ghosts are just kind of, they're just there. And they just make spooky sounds, right? But they're not, um, in many cases, it's not possible. Or, you know, I ask myself, why would we want to interfere with what they're doing? Like, you know, crossing people over the idea of that, like, that's something that I think comes more from us and our desire to like help spirits move rather than kind of let them go through their natural cycle unless they're asking for help or something. There's a sense that of urgency. I think what we see nowadays a lot is like people really something that is already cool enough with interfering with it, but something that's already cool and mysterious and then turning it into this huge thing, right? Oh, I'm either gonna rescue this ghost and set it free, or like I'm locked in a battle of good and evil because my closet door opens every night or something like that.
Blame Jennifer Love Hewitt for Ghost Whisperer. That's what happened. She was helping way too many ghosts out, and it just got stuck in everybody's head.
Right? Yeah. People think, yeah, everybody thinks that they're gonna, or you know, ghost hunters who are out there to find the truth. And that makes me chuckle because I'm like, the existence of ghosts doesn't really help us understand more about how the universe works or the nature of God or anything like that. Like ghost hunters aren't going to solve the mysteries of life and death. It's very narcissistic point of view.
Have you ever wondered why, we have this fear of the paranormal, but it seems like honestly we get a sense of comfortability with it. Whether it's like an acknowledgement that there is like an afterlife or you don't just fade away when you die, you can be stuck somewhere, whether you think the place is haunted or whether you think a person's just attached to something. But you mentioned something about like having like a lore of like a ghost in the house. That I can honestly say is from like almost every family I've ever been over their house or something like that and spent the night at a friend's house. It has always been a lore about a ghost in the attic or something like that. And remember one like my best buddy's been friends we've been friends together for 15 years. So when I was little, I would go over there and I'm just like I'm older now. I go over there and like, oh, that's Billy. You remember Billy's the ghost in the attic. I'm like, what? I'm like, I don't understand what that means. We're hearing weird noises and stuff like that. He's like, well, the house is settling. I'm like, first of all, if you live in Berlin, your house is like 300 years old. I'm like, I don't know how long it takes for a house to settle. You know what I mean? So like there's this I started noticing that there was a lore kind of that people would create and I was like, does it bring a sense of safety? Because you're thinking more about like, oh, we have a ghost in the attic, then at any moment someone could, break into our house, do this or something like that. But it's an interesting question because
I
we've never
have,
really
so
examined
you're
it.
so right. And I have so many thoughts about this because it's funny. The thing that you just said is so true because I used to A long time ago, I was a dog sitter and I would do overnight dog sitting here in Chicago at different people's homes, like some really nice homes and some like sketchy places. And obviously you're not super comfortable anytime you're staying somewhere that's not home. But I just remember being like home, alone in these people's homes in these various places and hearing noises in the middle of the night and being like, damn, is it a ghost or is it an intruder? And which is worse right now? Because I don't want it to be a ghost, but I'll take the ghost over, a serial killer. So, but yes, it's really funny. But I think you're absolutely right that it- you know, it- we do take comfort in ghost stories, and that is something that is as old as time. That's as old as people. That's as old as cavemen drawings on, on the insides of walls and things like that, petroglyphs and whatnot. That is, I think that's ingrained in us, like our fascination with not being the only high the highest level of the food chain or whatever, and like what's out there, what's in the woods, what's in the sky, what's in the sea, what's around us, and what does life mean. And so ghost stories bring us a sense of comfort, I think, a sense of like longevity, the idea that you know uh, that grandma's still around, or that somebody who lived in this house 200 years ago, 300 years ago is still here watching over it. Sometimes there's the tragic story as well, like, oh, the bride still haunts this place looking forever for her lost lover or her lost baby, and sort of helps us sort of frame and cope with things. But I don't know, like, it's always been that way for me. It's brought me a sense of comfort and excitement about the world around me. And I've seen that a lot in other people as well. Again, trends are now changing and shifting more towards people feeling afraid again because we are selling people this idea in TV and social media, TikTok and movies and everything, that everything's demonic and that like everything is scary and out to get us. But 10, 15, 20 years ago, um, it was still kind of cool, the idea of gonna go to this restaurant, it's supposed to be haunted and a glass might fly out from behind the bar, like that would be really neat. There's I think it's natural for us to feel that way and to feel a sense of comfort, sort of like I see this sort of like blanket around us of not being alone in the world, kind of.
What are your thoughts about the commercialization of the paranormal? Like, obviously, when you're looking up, like maybe when you first started writing your book about the Maryland um, ghosts and hauntings, when you're looking at locations, I mean, how much of it was commercialization? Like, where you would go to the place, interview some of the people, and you're like, okay, you guys are doing this as like a fun way to get, a quick buck. I hate to say that people would do that, but if you look at like the Roswell incident and then you look at like Roswell, New Mexico, that whole place, their McDonald's is in the shape of a UFO. That's their whole, come to Roswell, come to this, check out our UFO where the famous crash landing happened. I'm like, I don't even think you guys are interested in the subject. You guys are just trying to find a way to make a buck off something.
Right, right. So around the time that I got started in writing, because a lot has changed just in the last 10, 15 years. Places wouldn't necessarily make money off of advertising themselves as haunted unless they were a big ticket item like a ghost tour. Like Gettysburg ghost tours were still a thing, even though um, it was sort of like, oh, when you go to Gettysburg, this is something you can do. It wasn't like, oh, Gettysburg is this haunted Disneyland, right? So um, a lot of places that I contacted were very either didn't want to talk about ghost stories, and there are still places in Chicago that are that way, or they wanted to keep it low key. They're proud. Like I remember I worked at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland, and they were very proud of their ghost stories there because it was a nice way to connect people to history. We're going to talk about the ghosts here, but in a respectful way. To get people excited about the spaces that we're in because it was basically like living history. So it was cool in addition to that to be able to relate to the ghost lore. Now you definitely see the trends where people can cash in on some place being haunted, and if they can, they will. And uh there's Roswell, like you said, there's the Mothman, like Pleasantville. There was, Burkittsville, Maryland, after Blair Witch came out. I think Burkittsville didn't want to be a place where ghost hunters were coming, and the Blair Witch Project was obviously fictitious, but so many people flooded the town of Burkittsville, Maryland, that people were like, ugh, they were sitting on their porches knitting together those little like corn dolly looking things that the characters had been finding out in the woods, and they were like selling them to people. I mean, I would do it, right? But
Wait, did Blair Witch take place in Maryland?
yeah, so Blair Witch Project happened, was supposed to have happened in Burkittsville, Maryland. It was filmed partially near Burkittsville, and then also partially down in like Potomac State Park area. And you can still see, to my knowledge, you can still find the house from the end of the film. You can still find the house in I want to say it is Potomac State Park, behind like a military silo that was abandoned. Um, and so, they capitalized on it for a little while because they also just couldn't get rid of people. But you have places like Salem, that, you know, it's interesting to see that happen. What I've seen is like, if you observe, folks who are into the paranormal will know there's lots of controversies right now about like the Lizzie Borden house, Conjuring House, and some other places where people take it over, and then it turns into this really, um, you know, taking a place that people were axe murdered to death and then turning it into like a revolving door attraction is different. There's an ethical line, and sometimes it's hard to see where it is, and sometimes it's easy to see where it is, but it's sort of like, it's a little dark and interesting to me, like how people turn these places into these like Disneyland for hauntings kind of attractions. Now, some haunted places take that money and they put it right back into the upkeep and the renovation and restoration of their property, or they give it to charity, and they're usually fairly transparent about that. Um, I do miss the in some ways it's funny, like, I do not, encourage people to trespass, but I do miss the days when it's like clandestine, secret, cool thing that you did as like a rite of passage, like when you just go somewhere with your friends to see a place rather than pool, 8 of your friends together to pay $2,400 for an overnight in this location or something like that. It just seems like it's gotten kind of crazy.
Well, before you weren't ever allowed to really be on the property. Like if it was an asylum or something like that, it was shut down and there was fences all around it. So that's why you'd sneak in. But then
Most
eventually,
of the time, right. Most of the places I've gone to have been on the up and up because it was either when I was doing ghost hunting stuff or when I was filming something, part of a production people were allowed in, or I worked there and it was haunted, or I was invited, etc. There were a few places when I was a teenager, and then a few places when I was a young adult when I first came to Chicago that I snuck into after dark. Once I got a big girl job and was could not afford to be arrested for trespassing, that's when I had to stop, unfortunately. But yes, so, and then obviously sneaking into an abandoned place in the city of Chicago is different than sneaking into an abandoned place back in like the middle of nowhere in some small town in Maryland. So, um, but yes, I do miss the days when things were more secretive and mysterious and not so organized and forced into, and everybody having an opinion about it. And it's interesting because I'm doing podcast interviews, giving my opinion, and like I've dedicated my career to this. So like I make money off of this. I have to make money off of book sales and appearances and stuff like that. So I try not to sell people snake oil or like tell people what they should and shouldn't think, and just try to have it just, show as much integrity as possible.
well, I think it's a rational perspective. I have to ask, in the maybe last 10, 15 years, when you've seen kind of the whole culture shift a little bit, at least being more open to talking about it, what do you consider it a benefit or kind of a hurt with all these shows that have come out about obviously the paranormal?
Yeah, that's a question. It is a little bit of both, right? Like, uh
Because X Files isn't real, but they've done their best to make it seem like, oh, we're about to catch a ghost or we're about to encounter something. I'm like, I don't think
We're
so.
like, finding Bigfoot, where clearly we know that they're not going to find Bigfoot, but
Yeah.
we're hanging on every word in every episode. Yeah, I think it's been like a blessing and a curse because it's brought it into the mainstream in a way that has been positive for many people. Uh, bringing people together, making it okay to tell your stories, making it okay to be a weirdo, like, and things like that. I do meet really cool people at the places that I go to, and I have great connections with people. The drawback is that it has created an interesting sort of, or it has contributed to this cultural shift, this paranoia mindset, um, that can also feed into conspiracy theories and feed into like darker conspiracy theories that actually are damaging, and so people can really get drawn down these weird rabbit holes. Um, there's like an oversaturation of paranormal shows, and you've got the TikToks, and it's like I hear so many different versions of stories that are so wrong, like some history, like some of like Chicago history that's readily available and easy to research and easy to follow up on. And if you're going to do 1 or 2 minute video on TikTok or something like that, it's so easy to get the facts right, and people will still tell the same old bullshit story that is not, that's full of errors and it's full of stereotypes or it's full of caricaturization or whatever it is. And it's just like it would be so easy not to just keep telling this story. But here we are. Like, so it's just the misinformation and bad information that gets spread around is like wild.
I have to ask about the Deep Creek Lake. I don't know if you remember that story, but you wrote about it, and that was one that really got my interest.
Oh yeah. With the shuffling sounds in the refrigerator.
I mean, I don't know if you could summarize it for everybody, but I would love to hear it.
I'm glad you like that one because that's one of my favorite ones too. That's got all the good ghost story elements to it because I remember it is one of the creepiest things. And that's why I tell people like never think that your story isn't scary enough or your experience wasn't creepy enough, because some of the creepiest experiences are the ones that just take you out of the moment and just get under your skin in that weird way. So Deep Creek Lake was already kind of just has like a vibe to it in general. This campground that we stayed at had like, or I guess hotel area had a weird, not a weird vibe, I won't say that. It was just an eerie vibe. Like I loved it, and it was very strange at the same time. And then they had like the on the inside of the restaurant menu, they had a story about like Chief so and so that was seen on the property. He was seen in the restaurant, like this um, Native American spirit that haunted the property. And sometimes you could see him walk through. And I was like looking around the restaurant, like, don't get too excited, Amelia, but maybe I'll see him. And and then just having my parents be present and having it be like an experience where that all three of us had was really interesting. So, we went back to our hotel room, and I say hotel, it was like a lodge, I guess. It was like a lodge that was a hotel, but it was built to look like these like log cabin lodges, I guess is the best way to describe it. Um, and I guess, I mean, you could Google it, the lodge at Deep Creek Lake. And so we went to bed, everything was normal, and I was sleeping on, there was a bed on the opposite side of the room and then a bed on this side, I think. And my parents were in that bed and I was in this bed. And so my bed had a wall that on the other side of that was like this little mini kitchen with a little mini fridge. And I don't it's funny, I would have to like look up the story to remember all of the details, but I just remember waking up being really disoriented, and my parents were already up, and they were, it's like a kerfluffle of some kind, and it was like in the middle of the night. And they were like, what the hell is what's going on? Right. And like um what had happened was the refrigerator door in the mini fridge had like flown open, and like all the contents inside of the fridge had like been tossed out. So we had like just like cans of soda and lunch meat and snacks and like stuff you'd pack for your 10-year-old, your 13-year-old kid or whatever if you're going on your little fun camping boating trip or something. So and the floor was level, all that kind of stuff. And I remember my mom had said it was either me or my mom had heard like scratching sounds. I remember in my head, I saw like a mountain lion in my head, and there are mountain lions in Western Maryland, but I'm sure they don't come anywhere near lodges. But for some reason in my head, I was like, it wasn't a raccoon, it was a mountain lion. Because my parents were like, is there a raccoon in the room? Which is also a really ridiculous thought. Like we would probably know if there was a raccoon in
It
the
could
room.
happen.
But I remember they had said that they were like hearing these like scratching noises, and I had maybe internalized some scratching sounds while I was sleeping. Before I fell asleep, I heard a conversation going on in like low tones, like in a different language, and just like all like random creepy bizarre elements. And my parents are like picking up this mess on the floor. And like hotel mini fridges are pretty small, and so it didn't make any sense that there would be this big mess from it and everything, and they just could not make heads or tails of how this happened. And I remember it just it gave me the weirdest feeling in the pit of my stomach. Like, who or what was that and why? Of all the things that you could do if you had these powers, to make the fridge door open and then like spill sodas and stuff everywhere. Um, I don't know. That's the fun part, is like we don't know why, but that was truly one of the most interesting things. And my mom was freaked out. She was straight up freaked out. It was obvious that there was no raccoon in the room. This was like, that there had not been an animal. There was one door in and out, and it was like a standard steel hotel door kind of thing. Um, and my dad, who was not paranormally inclined, he thinks it's cool that like I'm into it, but he's not that into it. He was obviously hesitant to feed into like my mom being afraid, but you could tell he was also like really spooked. I think my mom woke up as it was happening. Like she heard like pop, 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 pop of all this thing, sodas flying out of the fridge. So,
I like that one the most because I have a relatable one, which is
oh
like
yeah, tell.
when I was like maybe 12 or 13 years old. It was just me and my mom. My mom was sleeping on one couch and I was sleeping on the other. They're kind of like an L. So you got one side and the other side. And we had gotten Slurpees, which I used to drink all the time when I was a kid. But my mom had these really tall, like old style candles where it's like it's not covered by glass, like how like this candle would be covered by glass or something. It was the actual wick part was out. And she also like really kind of I should call them luxurious curtains, and she always has them sitting right by one of those curtains. It was always a fire hazard fear for me when I was a kid. And we were watching a movie, and we both ended up falling asleep. And my Slurpee cup was in the middle of the table. Like I remember, I made sure so it didn't fall off the edge. You just put it right on there, and we both fell asleep. And then we heard a loud bang. We both woke up from a loud bang, but I had been splashed directly, her and me, in the eyes with my Slurpee. It had fallen off the table, landed straight up and down, like how it normally would if you just placed it there, and just I something bounced out of the straw and just hit us both in the face. And we look, and the candle had caught one of the curtains on fire.
Oh,
Not like something massive, like where you had to like call 911 or anything. It was just a small little thing, and it just happened. My mom relates it to a very religious thing, where it was someone watching over us, like a guardian
somebody
angel.
woke you guys up. Yeah.
I was like, I
That
don't
made
know.
all the hair stand up on my
I
arm.
was like, I don't know what that was, but oh my, like that. So I'm like very like now, even that's been 10 years, 12 years now. I'm very fire cautious because of that incident, but we've never been able to explain it. But me and her remember it the exact same.
That is so cool. That is so cool.
I don't know if that's a ghost, but it's weird.
I definitely would be inclined to like agree with your mom that it was like some sort of intervention, like somebody there and was like, oh, house is on fire, like clunk, wake up guys. And I think like sometimes maybe things like that are less spooky than being shaken awake by unseen hands or something like that. Like if something wants to get your attention. I remember after my grandmother died, I was like 6 years old. There was a series of weird things that happened in the apartment that my mom remembers much better than me, but, one of those things was that the toilet would flush in the middle of the night, like full on, like you could hear the handle whoosh, and then like everything, and like we were super freaked out. Again, like that is so spooky and so like, why? If you have the power to flush to pull the handle and flush the toilet. Like, there's so many other things that you could do as a
It's the
ghost.
only power you need.
Right, it's right, that's true, right? It's the most important thing, just to be able to flush. But, like, I remember my mom joking about it. Like, it was really disconcerting because my dad would work super late nights, so it would be just me and my mom, and then the toilet would flush, and she would jump like, and run into the bathroom. And she obviously she never saw the but she could see the water going down. And, I remember mostly her being afraid. Like, I remember her fear more than the incidents itself. And she said later, she was like, "I think my mother knows that if her ghost came to me," because my Uncle Bernie, my mom's brother, he has seen many spirits, many apparitions. He's seen her, he's seen his dad, he sees full body apparitions of cats, like his past pets, things like that. He has no problem with it. He does not have any issues with it. My mom would probably have a heart attack on the spot if her deceased mother appeared to her. And so she was joking that like I think it was my mom's way of telling us that she was there without doing something that would literally scare me so badly that I would be like in physical like pain from it. And I'm like, that's kind of a good point too. Like if I wanted to gently let somebody know, like waking you guys up by throwing a Slurpee, those probably could have been like a very considerate maneuver versus like shaking you awake or something else, a ghost appearing and like flipping the lights on and then panicking, who knows. But yeah, so that is that's really neat.
Gave me my get out of jail free card whenever I would throw taquitos in the microwave for like 15 minutes. She's like, "You're gonna set the house on fire when you do that."
Yeah, she's like, "Well," you were like, "It was a ghost. It was the ghost put the taquitos in. They changed the time."
But Amelia, I really do appreciate the time and being able to have this conversation with you. Is there a place where people can find any of your books and any other work you'd like to promote?
Yeah, so and thank you for having me on. Those were great questions too. Sometimes I answer like the same old questions. These were really good, like this was a good discussion, like of really fun questions. So thank you for having me on as well. And people can find me at ameliacotter.com, as well as I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And I also have a YouTube channel. I have my own little YouTube channel that I'm slowly building, but it's not, uh, if people that or want to subscribe to that, that would help me out big. Um, but um, but yeah, I'm everywhere. I'm on LinkedIn too with all of my everyday big girl professional stuff. So I love to hear from people. My email is ameliamcotter@gmail.com. The social media handles where you can mostly find me are Amelia M. Cotter, M as in mango. So yeah, definitely get in touch with me. I love to connect with people.
Well, I'll make sure I link all your links in the description. You're always welcome back on my show. I'm sure we'll do another podcast episode. We'll discuss. I'd like to get your thoughts on sleep and encountering afterlife or paranormal experiences in your sleep. I don't know if
Ooh, okay.
you've ever heard of
Ooh, I
that
like that's
before.
I love that topic. Yes.
But I'll make sure to link all your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.